The night was quiet in the deep space listening station, the kind of silence that felt heavy, broken only by the low hum of machines. Technician Aaron Vance was half asleep at his desk sipping cold coffee when the monitor flickered with something strange. It wasn't the usual static. It wasn't earth chatter, it was different. At first, it sounded like broken glass rattling in a storm, a jumble of sounds, echoes, and strange frequencies. Aaron frowned and turned a few dials, clearing the signal. Slowly, words began to form. Words no human language had ever spoken, yet somehow, through the translation software, meaning bled through. "Please, help us," Aaron froze. His fingers hovered above the console. The voice was synthetic but trembling, as if trying to carry fear across the void. "Please, anyone, help us. They are coming. The Dreadnoughts are coming." The words, repeated again and again, carried on broken waves of sound that shouldn't have even reached Earth. The signal wasn't aimed here. It wasn't meant for humanity at all. It was an accident, a cosmic mistake. But the plea for help had landed squarely in human hands. Aaron felt his throat tighten. He had listened to thousands of transmissions over the years, most of them empty noise, some of them signals from Earth bouncing off the atmosphere, some of them echoes of distant pulsars. But this was alive. This was a cry of desperation. He could almost feel the fear bleeding from it. He called his supervisor, his voice shaking. "Sir, you need to hear this." Within hours, the message was rushed through networks of military and civilian science divisions. At first, most assumed it was a hoax. Too clean, too dramatic. Some claimed it was just a strange pulsar mimicking patterns. Others whispered of secret governments planting fake signals. But then came the second message. This one wasn't broken. It was sharp, urgent, like a scream into the night. A longer broadcast, filled with the same plea but with coordinates embedded in the wave. Numbers that pointed to a star system far beyond humanity's reach, yet real, mapped faintly in human charts. "Please, allies, hear us. We cannot hold them back. They are endless. The Dreadnoughts are coming." The word repeated again and again. Dreadnoughts. Heavy. Final. Like the tolling of a bell. In the United Nations chamber, the leaders of Earth gathered. For the first time in decades, warlords, rivals, and enemies sat in the same hall. They weren't discussing trade or border disputes. They were listening to a message that wasn't even meant for them. Some scoffed. "This isn't our fight," one minister said, her voice cold. "We are not ready for space wars. We barely manage peace among ourselves." Others argued with fire in their eyes. "Maybe we can't win," said an admiral. "But ignoring a cry for help is not who we are. If this were Earth calling into the void, wouldn't we want someone to answer?" The debate raged for hours. Fear clashed with hope. Caution clashed with courage. On one side stood those who saw only danger. On the other, those who saw a chance to prove that humanity was more than just another small voice in the galaxy. Finally, the decision was made. Humanity would answer. A reply was crafted, shaky but resolute. It carried the weight of billions of souls who for once spoke as one species. The words were simple. "We heard you. We are coming." No one knew if the Threlin, the unknown voices, would even understand the reply. No one knew what Dreadnoughts really meant. But still, humanity sent the signal into the dark, like a candle against a storm. In the days that followed, ships were prepared. Not massive fleets, not galaxy-shaking armadas, but what humanity had. Frigates, carriers, old warships re-outfitted for deep space. Soldiers volunteered. Scientists joined. Engineers, medics, and ordinary men and women signed their names to a mission no one truly understood. The Earth, for the first time in history, felt united by something larger than itself. Nations lowered their flags to raise a single one, the flag of humankind. And yet beneath the unity there was fear. Soldiers kissed families goodbye, not knowing if they would ever return. Mothers wept as their children left for a fight they could not imagine. The streets were filled with whispers. Some prayed, some cursed, but no one could deny it. Humanity had stepped into a story that was not theirs, answering a message not meant for them. Somewhere, light years away, a fragile people were waiting. Somewhere, monsters called Dreadnoughts were approaching, and humanity, fragile, untested humanity, was moving to meet them. In the dark, where silence was once eternal, a new sound carried across the stars. The sound of humans saying, "We are here." The signal had changed everything. For the first time in human history, the governments of Earth were united by the voice of strangers. Yet unity did not mean agreement. Far from it. In a great hall beneath the United Nations banner, representatives from every major nation sat around the circular chamber. The atmosphere was tense, thick with arguments. The broadcast from the Thrillin had been played again and again on the massive screen. "Please, help us. The Dreadnoughts are coming." The chamber filled with voices sharp and heavy. "We cannot risk our future for a war that isn't ours," said one leader, his suit sharp but his eyes tired. "Humanity is still learning to walk among the stars. We don't even have colonies beyond our own system. Why should we bleed for aliens we've never met?" A general from the east slammed his fist on the table. "Because someone called for help. That is reason enough." "They didn't call for us," another replied bitterly. "They wanted their allies, not humanity. We only overheard it by chance. If we go, we are walking into death blindly." Whispers spread through the chamber. They all knew the truth. Humanity was not strong compared to the unknown civilizations of the galaxy. Their fleets were small, their weapons untested against interstellar enemies. If the Dreadnoughts were as powerful as the trembling voice suggested, what chance did they have? But then a voice rose above the noise. It came from a woman in a plain gray uniform, an admiral who had served in wars back on Earth. Her hair was streaked with silver, her voice calm but steady. "Do you know what it feels like to call for help and hear nothing?" she asked. The room grew still. For centuries, our own people cried in famine, in war, and disaster. Sometimes no one came, but when someone did, when a stranger reached out a hand, that changed everything. That gave hope. She paused, letting her words sink in. "We may not be strong. We may not be ready. But imagine if it were us shouting into the void. Wouldn't we want anyone to answer?" Silence followed. Even those who opposed the mission lowered their eyes. Her words had struck something deep in the human heart. After hours of debate, arguments, and fear, the vote was taken. By a narrow margin, Earth chose its path. The chamber's speaker, with a heavy voice, declared, "Humanity will answer the call. We will not remain silent." The decision spread like fire across the planet. News screens lit up with the announcement. Some cheered, proud that humanity had chosen compassion. Others raged, claiming it was foolishness that would lead only to graves. But despite the division, something extraordinary happened. Volunteers came forward. Men and women lined up outside recruitment stations. Not only soldiers, but doctors, mechanics, engineers, translators, and even farmers who simply wanted to help in whatever way they could. Young and old, rich and poor, people signed their names on lists that promised no return. They were not going for conquest or glory. They were going because someone out there had begged for help, and humanity could not ignore it. The preparations were rushed but determined. Shipyards worked day and night, reforging vessels built for defense into warships fit for travel beyond the solar system. Old frigates that had never left orbit were refitted with new engines. Cargo haulers were stripped and armed with railguns and missile bays. Humanity did not have fleets like legends described in books, but they had ingenuity. They had heart. On the training grounds, soldiers drilled under harsh suns. They practiced boarding maneuvers, zero-gravity combat, medical rescues. In hangars, engineers worked with their bare hands, sparks flying as they patched ships together. Families stood outside fences waving flags and holding back tears. One father hugged his daughter tightly before she boarded a ship. "Why are you doing this?" he whispered, his voice breaking. She smiled faintly, brushing away his tears. "Because someone has to." Stories like hers spread across the globe. Humanity was preparing to leap into a war they did not start, for a people they did not know, against an enemy they did not understand. And yet, in the quiet moments, fear lingered. Every soldier lying in their bunk wondered what a dreadnought truly looked like. Every scientist stared at the coordinates, knowing it was farther than anyone had ever gone. Every parent feared the worst when they kissed their children goodbye. Still, humanity moved forward. The fleet was assembled, small compared to the legends of galactic powers, but larger than any Earth had ever gathered. Flags from every nation were painted on the hulls, but above them all one symbol was repeated, the mark of Earth, the emblem of humankind united. Before departure, the commander of the mission stood before the cameras. She looked weary, but her voice carried strength. "Make no mistake," she said. "We do not know what we will find. We may not survive, but we go because someone asked for help. That is what makes us human. That is what makes us strong. The world held its breath. In the void between stars, far from human eyes, a small, fragile species called the Threelan waited in fear. They had no idea who had answered their call. They had no idea that humanity, strange, stubborn humanity, was coming. Not because it was wise, not because it was safe, but because they could not ignore a voice crying in the dark. The human fleet left Earth like a trail of sparks, dozens of ships pushing through the black sea of space. Engines burned bright, carrying thousands of brave men and women farther than humanity had ever dared to go. Weeks passed in the silence between stars, filled only with training, maintenance, and the quiet thoughts of those who had left everything behind. Then, finally, the coordinates from the alien message came into view. At first, the system looked empty. A small star burned weakly, surrounded by scattered asteroids and broken fragments of rock. But as the fleet drew closer, shapes emerged, fragile, trembling ships drifting in the void. They were small, delicate vessels, battered and scarred as if they had already survived too many battles. These were the Threelan. The first communication came as a flicker on the human screens. Strange bird-like faces appeared, creatures with feathered crests, slender beaks and eyes that glowed faintly in the dark. Their wings trembled behind them, not built for war but for fragile beauty. When they saw humans for the first time, the Threelan gasped. Some of them covered their faces with clawed hands, others simply stared in silence. "You," one of them finally spoke, their voice soft and broken through translation. "You are not the ones we called." The human commander, Admiral Reyes, stood tall on the screen. Her uniform was plain, her face calm, but her voice carried the weight of every soul behind her. "No," she said gently, "we are not your allies. But we heard your message. We came anyway." The Threelan exchanged fearful looks. Their wings fluttered nervously. "You should not have come," another said, their voice trembling. "You cannot stand against them. You are small." A silence stretched across the comms. The words were not meant as insult but as sorrow. To the Threelan, the arrival of humans was not salvation, it was tragedy. Another people doomed to be destroyed alongside them. Admiral Reyes leaned forward. Her gray eyes hardened, but her voice remained steady. "Perhaps we are small. Perhaps we are not ready. But you asked for help. We could not stay silent." Her words carried into the alien silence, sinking into the Threelan like stones into water. The aliens looked down, wings folding tight against their bodies. For a moment, hope flickered in their glowing eyes, but it was quickly drowned by despair. "You do not understand," whispered the first Threelan. "The Dreadnoughts are not conquerors. They are executioners. They do not leave survivors. You will die with us." A hush fell over the human bridge. Soldiers and crew shifted uncomfortably, hearing the weight of those words. Executioners, no mercy, no survival. Still, Admiral Reyes did not falter. "Then we will die standing beside you," she answered softly. The Threelan stared at her, unable to comprehend. In their history, no species had ever willingly chosen to fight alongside them. The allies they had called for, the Vakari, were powerful, a great empire with fleets that could crush worlds. But the humans, they were strangers, fragile, reckless, and yet they had come. The Threelan leader lowered their head. "Why?" they asked. "Why would you do this?" The Admiral's voice was quiet, almost like a whisper. "Because someone has to." For a long time, the Threelan said nothing. Their ships floated in silence, their people whispering among themselves in voices like rustling feathers. Finally, the leader looked up again. "Then you are fools," they said softly. "But perhaps you are the kind of fools the stars have been waiting for." The humans began transferring supplies to the Threelan ships: medicine, food, and repair equipment. Engineers worked side by side with bird-like aliens, patching torn hulls and stabilizing failing reactors. Doctors tended to trembling Threelan young who had gone hungry for too long. Slowly, the aliens began to understand. Humanity had not come for conquest or reward. They had come because it was right. And in the quiet moments when the work slowed and fear returned, the Threelan would look at the humans and whisper, almost in disbelief, "You are truly here." You stayed, but peace was fragile. The stars shifted. Sensors screamed. Shadows moved at the edge of the system. The Threelan froze, their wings shaking violently, their glowing eyes filled with terror. "They are here," one cried. "The Dreadnoughts have come." The humans turned to their screens, their hearts pounding. At first it looked like darkness itself was moving. Then the shapes grew clearer. Colossal warships, black as night, sliding into the system like predators. Each was larger than a city, their hulls bristling with weapons, their presence heavy as doom. The Threllan ships shrank back instinctively, like prey before a predator. Their leader's voice broke through the comms, trembling with despair. "You see now? There is no escape. The Dreadnoughts have come, and yet in the human fleet no ship retreated. Engines roared, weapons armed. Crews stood at their stations with shaking hands but unbroken resolve. Admiral Reyes gave the order, her voice calm but fierce. Prepare for battle." For the first time in history, humanity stood face to face with monsters of the void, and though fear gnawed at their bones, one truth held them together. They had come to answer a call for help, and they would not turn away. The system grew darker, as if the stars themselves were shrinking away. They appeared without warning, giant shadows slipping into reality, their outlines sharp and merciless. The Dreadnoughts had arrived. They moved with terrifying grace, each ship a floating fortress vast enough to blot out the light of the distant sun. Their black hulls gleamed with cold steel, bristling with weapons like thorns on a beast. The Threllan trembled at the sight. Their delicate wings fluttered helplessly as panic filled their ships. Across the comms, frightened voices cried out, "They have come! It is over! There is no hope." The humans stared in silence, their breaths heavy. Never before had their eyes seen machines of such size. The Dreadnoughts dwarfed their entire fleet, each enemy ship larger than the biggest city on Earth. Even the strongest human battleship was a toy compared to the enemy's smallest vessel. On the human flagship, Admiral Reyes stood with her hands clasped behind her back. Her crew looked to her, fear in their eyes. She felt the weight of every soul pressing down on her shoulders, but her voice was calm when she spoke. "Lock formations. Shields up. Prepare all weapons." Her words carried through the fleet. Though hands trembled, though hearts raced, every ship obeyed. Engines burned brighter. Weapons came alive with a low hum. Humanity was preparing to fight giants. The first strike came swift and merciless. A Dreadnought's cannon fired, and a human frigate was torn apart in an instant, exploding into a cloud of burning metal. The Threllan cried out in despair, convinced the humans would scatter and flee, but they did not. Instead, the human ships closed ranks, moving tighter, protecting one another like wolves circling against a predator. Missiles streaked through the void, railguns thundered, and lasers cut across the dark. Small ships darted between blasts, firing with everything they had. The Threllan watched in awe. Humanity did not retreat. Humanity fought. Still, the difference in power was brutal. Another frigate fell, then a destroyer. Each loss sent shockwaves through the fleet, but for every ship destroyed, the humans struck back. A daring pilot launched her crippled vessel directly into an enemy dreadnought, detonating the reactor in a blaze that tore chunks from the monster's armor. The explosion shook the system. For the first time, a dreadnought was damaged. The Threllan gasped in disbelief. They heard it," whispered one of their commanders, unable to believe their eyes. The humans pressed harder, weaving strategies the enemy did not expect. They used asteroid fields as cover, forcing the massive dreadnoughts to waste fire on drifting rock. They split into squadrons, attacking from multiple angles, confusing the enemy's tracking systems. They did not fight with brute force. They fought with cleverness, with courage, with stubborn refusal to die quietly. But courage had its cost. Every maneuver, every strike meant sacrifice. The humans paid in lives. Entire crews went silent. Ships were lost in fire and silence. Each time a vessel was destroyed, the survivors gritted their teeth and fought harder, refusing to let the fallen be forgotten. On the flagship's bridge, alarms screamed. Reyes gripped the console as the ship shook under enemy fire. Sparks rained from broken wires. She looked around at her crew, faces pale but determined. "Admiral," one officer whispered, voice trembling. "We can't win this. Not like this." Reyes's jaw tightened. She knew the truth. They were outmatched, outgunned, and outnumbered. But she also knew something the enemy could not measure. Something that was not written in any calculation of war. "We don't have to win," she said. Her voice was steady, her eyes fierce. "We only have to show them we will never kneel." Her words spread through the comms, carried to every ship, every soldier, every frightened heart. And something shifted. Fear became fire. Despair became defiance. Humanity fought not as prey, but as challengers. The Threlin watched, stunned, as these strange creatures from a distant blue world threw themselves into the jaws of death. No hesitation, no surrender. And for the first time, the Threlin felt something they had not known in years. Hope. Yet the battle was far from over. More dreadnoughts entered the system, their hulking silhouettes blotting out the stars. The human fleet was battered, bleeding, running low. The void burned with fire and steel. Against all reason, humanity still stood. The battlefield was chaos. Metal screamed. Fire burned in the silence of space. The dreadnoughts moved like gods of war, their weapons tearing holes in the void. Yet still, against all reason, humanity fought back. The Threlin could not believe what they saw. Their fragile ships had always scattered before the dreadnoughts, fleeing like prey before a predator. But these humans? They charged, they bled, they stood in the fire willingly. A small human frigate danced around a dreadnought's cannons, firing torpedoes again and again. Every hit was like a mosquito bite against a giant, but the crew did not stop. When their ammunition ran dry, the captain gave the final order. The frigate ignited its engines and slammed itself into the enemy's hull. A blinding explosion tore through the darkness, and for the first time in centuries, a dreadnought shuddered and fell silent. The Threlin gasped in disbelief. They destroy themselves willingly? One whispered, feathers trembling. Yes. Another answered, awe in their voice. They fight as if death itself is only another weapon. Humanity's tactics were reckless, dangerous, and illogical. But they were not fighting by the rules of war. They fought with desperation, with creativity, with the raw fire of survival. One squadron lured a dreadnought into an asteroid field, weaving between rocks at breakneck speed. The massive enemy ship tried to follow, its weapons blasting through stone and debris. But the humans used the asteroids as shields, hiding their movements until the moment came. Then, with perfect timing, they fired thrusters and broke apart an asteroid the size of a mountain. The shattered fragments slammed into the dreadnought's hull, breaking through its armor in a storm of destruction. Another human vessel, its engines failing, refused to retreat. Instead, it opened its hangars and released every fighter it had. The tiny craft swarmed the dreadnought like hornets, stabbing again and again with missiles and gunfire. They knew most would never return, but they flew anyway, their courage burning brighter than any star. Admiral Reyes stood on her flagship's bridge, her face lit by the glow of battle. Around her, crew members shouted reports. Sparks rained from broken panels and alarms wailed. Still, she remained calm. Keep pressing, she ordered. Every second we fight is a second they remember us. Her words carried across the fleet. Humanity knew the truth. They could not win a clean victory. But their goal was not survival alone. Their goal was to show the dreadnoughts that they were not prey. The enemy began to hesitate. The dreadnoughts were used to easy kills, to frightened victims who begged for mercy. They had never faced an enemy who fought with such madness, who turned death into strategy, who laughed in the face of annihilation. For the first time, the hunters felt the sting of fear. In the wreckage of a burning cruiser, a human engineer crawled through smoke and fire. With blood on his face and tools in his hands, he reached the reactor controls. His crew was gone, his ship dying, but his voice was steady as he whispered into the comms. For Earth, he triggered the overload. His ship became a sun, its death tearing another dreadnought apart. The Threlin wept when they saw it. These strange creatures from a distant world were unlike any species they had ever known. They were not the strongest. They were not the most advanced. But they were something far more dangerous. They refused to surrender. Across the battlefield, human boarding parties launched. Small pods smashed against the dreadnoughts' hulls, cutting holes through armor. From them spilled soldiers in heavy suits armed with rifles and explosives. They stormed the enemy's interiors, fighting in narrow halls of steel. The dreadnoughts had never expected this. They had prepared for battles of ships, not of men with fire in their hearts. Explosions tore through corridors. Gunfire echoed in alien chambers. Human voices shouted war cries, carrying defiance into the enemy's core. The tide did not turn completely, but the balance shifted. For every human ship that fell, another dreadnought burned or faltered. The impossible was happening. The monsters were bleeding. On the human flagship, Reyes stood with her crew, watching the battle unfold. Her voice was low, almost a whisper meant only for herself. They thought us weak, she said. But they will learn. We are human. We endure. The fleet was battered, nearly broken. Dozens of ships lay silent, thousands of lives already gone, but against all odds humanity still fought. The Thralin, inspired, began to join in with their own small ships. Their weapons were weak, their vessels fragile, but beside humanity they felt braver. For the first time in generations they did not run, and as the battle raged on, a truth became clear. The Dreadnoughts had power, but humanity had something else. Humanity had fire. The battle burned across the stars like a living storm. Wreckage floated in endless darkness, broken ships scattering their pieces into the void. Yet still the humans fought on. Their fleet was smaller now, their numbers cut nearly in half, but their spirit refused to die. The Thralin could hardly believe their eyes. For so long they had lived in fear of the Dreadnoughts. Every time those monsters appeared, whole worlds fell silent. Yet now, against all logic, the humans were not fleeing. They were pushing back. On one of the smaller Thralin vessels, Captain Lyra watched the humans with wide eyes. Her ship was fragile, barely armed with defensive lasers, but when she saw a human destroyer ram itself into a dreadnought, cracking its armor apart, something broke inside her. Fear was replaced by something else, courage. "We will not run," she told her crew, her voice trembling but strong. "If the humans can fight, then so can we." Her ship turned and joined the battle. Others followed. At first only a few, then dozens, then hundreds. Inspired by the madness of humanity, the Thralin fleet surged forward. Their weapons might have been weak, but together they became a storm of fire. The humans noticed. On the flagship Valiant, Admiral Reyes smiled for the first time in hours. "They're moving," she said softly. "They finally believe." Her officers cheered, but Reyes raised her hand. "Stay sharp. This fight isn't over. The Dreadnoughts still have the advantage," and she was right. The massive enemy ships roared back. Their cannons blazed, tearing through human and Thralin vessels alike. The Dreadnoughts did not understand surrender, nor did they know mercy. They only knew destruction. A massive blast hit the Valiant, shaking it to its core. Sparks flew across the bridge, crew members thrown from their stations. Still the flagship held, its armor buckling but not breaking. Rhea steadied herself, blood dripping from her forehead, and barked her orders. "Return fire! Target their engines! Make them bleed!" The human fleet answered. Missiles streaked across space, railguns fired, and ships wove dangerously close to their giant enemies. It was suicide to approach so near, but humanity did not care. Boarding pods continued to slam into dreadnoughts. Inside, the fight was even more brutal. Human marines stormed corridors filled with alien metal, their rifles flashing. The dreadnought soldiers were larger, stronger, armored in dark plates. But humans fought with speed, with fury, with desperation. Sergeant Cole led one such squad. His team of 12 had lost half their number already, but they pressed forward. The air was filled with smoke and fire, but his voice rang out clear. "Keep moving. Don't stop. We take their core or we die trying." His soldiers shouted back, their boots thundering against the steel floor. They pushed into the heart of the dreadnought, grenades exploding, enemies falling. Every step forward was paid in blood, but they did not falter. Back in orbit, the tide of battle was beginning to shift. For every human ship that fell, another dreadnought took damage it had never suffered before. The Thralin, once powerless, began to land small victories of their own. Their swarms of ships distracted the dreadnoughts, giving humanity the chance to strike deeper. A miracle was forming, but miracles were never free. On the edges of the battlefield, the dreadnoughts gathered, their massive hulls glowing with energy. They had learned now. Humanity's fire had caught them off guard, but they would not be surprised again. The giants began to coordinate, their weapons focusing, their shields adapting. Suddenly, a human battleship exploded, then another. The dreadnoughts pushed harder, as if enraged by the defiance they had never known before. On the Valiant, Reyes gripped the rail of the bridge, her knuckles white. Her officers looked at her, waiting, fear in their eyes. She knew what they were asking. Was this the end? Her voice came firm, steady, carrying across every human channel. "Listen to me. They think we fight to live. They think we fight because we fear death. But they are wrong. We fight for each other. We fight for Earth. We fight because no monster will ever take away our will. Even if we fall, we will be remembered. Fight with everything you have." Her words spread like wildfire. Across the battlefield, human crews shouted and wept, their fear melting into fire. Even the Thralin heard it, and their courage grew stronger. The battle raged with renewed fury. Human frigates dove headfirst into enemy fire. Thrillin' ships swarmed like insects, striking weak points. Marines deep inside dreadnoughts planted explosives and detonated reactors. One by one, the impossible began to happen. A dreadnought collapsed under its own burning core. Another cracked open from within, its halls echoing with the cries of human soldiers. The monsters had begun to fall, but so had humanity. The cost was terrible. Ships burned. In a small village, a cat named Whiskers discovered a magic fish in a pond. The fish promised 3 wishes in exchange for its freedom. Whiskers wished, and humanity had shown the galaxy that even when drowning in blood and fire, they would never bow. The battlefield was drowning in fire. Human and Threlin ships drifted as broken shells, burning silently in the void. The dreadnoughts had taken wounds, many destroyed, but their fury was endless. Humanity's victory was not yet secure, and then the sky darkened. From the depths of space, something vast emerged, larger than any ship humanity had ever seen, larger even than the burning dreadnoughts around it. It was a fortress, a moving mountain of steel. Its shadow swallowed the battlefield, its engines glowing like suns. The final dreadnought had arrived. The Dreadnought Prime. The Threlin cried out in despair. Their courage cracked. "It cannot be defeated," they whispered, feathers shaking. "It is the destroyer of worlds. None have ever faced it and lived." On the human flagship Valiant, silence fell as the massive ship appeared. Crew members stared in awe and terror. The Prime was not just a warship, it was a god of war. Admiral Reyes stood tall at the center of the bridge, her face pale but her eyes burning. She had expected this. She knew the enemy would not give up so easily. "Signal the fleet," she ordered. "We hold the line. We finish this." Her officers looked at her in disbelief. "Admiral, we can't win against that. It's too powerful." Reyes did not flinch. "Then we die fighting." Across the battlefield, human ships reformed their lines. They were battered, smoking, nearly broken, but not defeated. Threlin vessels hovered close, fear in their eyes. But when they saw the humans still standing, still ready to fight, they could not turn away. Together, they faced the Prime. The giant dreadnought moved slowly but with unstoppable power. Its cannons lit up the void, beams of pure destruction slicing through space. Whole human squadrons vanished in seconds. The Prime did not hesitate. It meant to crush all hope at once. Yet humanity fought back. A destroyer squadron dove toward the Prime's hull, releasing every torpedo they had. The blast sparked against its shields, barely leaving a mark. But the humans did not retreat. They slammed their crippled ships against the giant, detonating their reactors. The explosions shook the Prime, its shields flickering. The galaxy had never seen such madness. Inside the Prime, boarding pods struck. Sergeant Cole and what remained of his squad forced their way through metal corridors, fighting enemies 3 times their size. Every room was painted with smoke and fire, every hallway filled with screams. They planted charges, hacked systems, did everything to bleed the monster from within. But the Prime was vast. It was endless. For every victory, 10 more enemies appeared. Cole knew they would not leave alive. But when he looked at his soldiers, battered and bloody, he saw the same fire in their eyes. "We make this count," he told them. "For Earth, for everyone who died, we end this monster." And they pushed on. Outside, the Prime unleashed another wave of fire. The Valiant shook violently as a blast tore through its hull. Alarms wailed, decks flooded with smoke, but still the ship held. Admiral Reyes braced herself, staring at the enormous enemy filling her view. Her voice was steady, almost calm. "All ships converge on the Prime, use everything." "We burn it to the ground," the fleet answered. Human and Threlin vessels alike dove at the giant, their weapons blazing. Fighters swarmed like hornets, torpedoes streaked across the void. Railguns hammered again and again. The Prime roared back, ripping ships apart with every strike, but the Allies refused to break. The battle became a storm of sacrifice. Frigates threw themselves into enemy fire just to protect their comrades. Cruisers burned their reactors to power one last devastating strike. Pilots whispered farewells into their comms as they dove into the Prime's guns, and slowly, impossibly, the monster began to falter. Its shields flickered, its armor cracked, its engines stuttered. The galaxy's undefeatable Titan was bleeding. On the Valiant, Admiral Reyes made her choice. The flagship was failing, systems collapsing, fires spreading across the decks. There was only one path left. She turned to her crew, her voice strong. "Prepare to ram." Gasps filled the bridge. "Admiral, no!" "Yes," she said firmly. This ship was built to defend Earth. Today it will save the galaxy. For every soul who fought here, we finished this." Her crew looked at her with tears in their eyes, but none refused. They knew she was right. The Valiant turned, engines roaring, flames trailing behind it. It sped toward the Prime, every weapon firing in one last desperate barrage. On the comms, Reyes spoke not just to her fleet, but to every ally, every human, every Threlan watching. "Remember this day. Remember that humanity did not bow. We are not prey. We are the fire." The Valiant struck the Prime's hull. For a moment all was silent. Then light consumed the stars. The explosion ripped through the Prime, tearing its armor apart, splitting its engines, burning its core. The great Dreadnought, the monster of legend, screamed as it broke apart in fire. When the light faded, silence filled the void. The Prime was gone. The battlefield was scattered with wreckage, with silence, with loss. But in that silence, hope lived. The impossible had been done. Humanity had broken the unbreakable, and across the galaxy, a new truth echoed. The Dreadnoughts were not gods. They could bleed, they could fall, and it was humanity who proved it. The battlefield was quiet now. Where once cannons roared and ships burned, there was only silence. Wreckage drifted slowly in the endless dark, the broken bodies of ships and soldiers turning among the stars. The Prime was gone. The unshakable monster had been destroyed. But the cost? The cost was heavy. Human ships lay shattered, their crews lost forever. Threlan vessels floated powerless, their captains gone. Thousands upon thousands had given their lives so the galaxy could see this day. On the Threlan capital world, news spread faster than light. When the people heard that the Prime had fallen, they could not believe it. Whole cities poured into the streets, weeping and shouting, their voices rising into the skies. For the first time in centuries, the fear that had chained them began to break. And on Earth, though distance kept them from the battle, humanity's message still reached home. Families gathered around screens, listening to the final words of Admiral Reyes as her ship plunged into the Prime. Her voice was steady, her courage burning even in her last breath. "Remember this day. We are not prey. We are the fire." Those words became immortal. They were whispered in schools, carved into stone, carried across the stars. But victory was not joy alone. In the aftermath, the survivors drifted among the wreckage, searching for life. Rescue ships moved through the ruins, pulling wounded from shattered hulls, honoring the dead. Sergeant Cole, bloodied and scarred, staggered out of a captured section of the Prime. He had survived, though barely. Most of his squad had not. He stood among the wreckage of alien steel, staring at the stars where the Valiant had once burned. His heart ached, but in that ache there was pride. "They did it," he whispered. "We did it." For the Threlan, the lesson was even deeper. They had lived for generations believing themselves weak, fragile, forever prey to stronger forces. Yet the humans had shown them something new. The Threlan did not need to run. They could fight if only they found the courage. And so in the days after the battle, the Threlan leaders made a promise. "We will never forget the humans. They are not only our allies, they are our teachers. They gave us fire when we had none." The galaxy watched closely. Other species far away heard the stories. They heard of humans who rammed their ships into titans, who laughed in the face of death, who fought not for conquest but for each other. And slowly, a new respect began to spread. The Dreadnoughts, the nightmare that had haunted civilizations for centuries, were not invincible. Humanity had proved it. On Earth, monuments were built. The names of the fallen were etched into steel and stone, stretching endlessly across walls of memory. Families came to lay flowers. Children touched the names of parents they would never see again, and elders bowed their heads in silence. But even in grief there was pride. Humanity had stood against the impossible. Admiral Reyes was gone, but her name became legend. Statues rose in her honor, not only on Earth but on Threlan worlds too. In the great plaza of the Threlan capital, a towering figure of her stood, her eyes looking to the stars. Beneath her was carved the simple phrase, "We are the fire." Years later, when survivors spoke of the battle, their voices always grew soft. They remembered the fear, the sacrifice, the way the sky lit up when the Prime finally fell. But more than anything, they remembered the feeling that humanity had given them, the feeling that even in the darkest night, there was always light. And so the story was told again and again. Parents told it to children, Soldiers told it to recruits. Captains told it to their crews. It was no longer just a story of war. It was a story of hope, of defiance, of what it meant to be human. The dreadnought threat was not gone forever. Somewhere in the endless dark, others surely remained. But now the galaxy knew something it had never dared to dream. The giants could bleed. The monsters could fall, and no empire was eternal. Humanity had lit a fire, and that fire would never die. As the survivors returned home, for endless fish, a cozy bed, and a bell that rang softly, the fish granted all 3 wishes and swam away, leaving Whiskers content and purring in the sun.